The angel number that appears when you can't forgive yourself. There is one scene your mind keeps replaying. It is usually late, and it arrives uninvited. A thing you said, or did, or failed to do. Years ago. Everyone involved has moved on. You have not. You know the exact temperature of that memory. You know which sentence comes first, which image follows, and how the whole thing ends. It does not surprise you anymore. It simply arrives, the way a tide arrives, and you let it in because you have never found the door that closes. You have tried to interrupt it. You have tried breathing differently, reading until your eyes gave out, staying busy until exhaustion made thinking impossible. Sometimes that works for a night. It has never worked for a season. Here is the first answer, stated plainly. The number is 444, and it is not showing up to remind you of what you did. It appears when guilt has stopped being an event you remember and has quietly become a sentence you are still serving. It marks the moment repair became possible, not the moment blame began, and it does not need much of an invitation. A song can open it, a street you used to walk, a name that belongs to someone else entirely. Your mind has built 100 small entrances into that one room, and it knows all of them by heart. And in that same period, a number started following you. Clocks. Receipts, dates, always the same one, you noticed. Then you dismissed it. Coincidence, you decided, your brain looking for patterns because you are tired. But it kept happening. It happened on a morning when you had not been thinking about anything. It happened on a day that already felt strange. It happened once at a moment so precise that you actually stopped walking. And it kept not going away. That is the part that eventually gets under your skin. Not the frequency, the persistence. Coincidences lose interest in you. This one did not. And somewhere along the way you stopped mentioning it to anyone, because saying it out loud made it sound smaller than it felt. There is a particular loneliness in that. Carrying two secrets at once. The thing you did, and the strange sense that something has been trying to reach you about it. You have probably rehearsed telling someone. You have imagined the conversation, chosen the person, edited the wording so it would not sound unhinged. And then you did not have it because the only way to explain the number would be to explain the room, and the room has never been open to visitors. But here is the truth about that sign. It does not arrive when you make a mistake. It arrives later, when guilt stops being an emotion and becomes an identity. When you no longer say, I did something wrong. When you start saying, I am something wrong. Those two sentences sound almost the same. They are not. One describes an event that happened in time and can therefore end in time. The other describes a permanent condition, and permanent conditions have no release date. An event has edges. It began on a certain day and it stopped on a certain day, and everything after that day is technically something else. A condition has no edges. It goes wherever you go. You take it to work. You take it into every new relationship. You take it into rooms it has no business entering. That is what the repetition is marking. Not the act, the sentence you kept serving afterward. And you have been serving it quietly. Nobody around you knows. You function. You show up. You are kind to people, sometimes excessively kind. And none of them would guess that a part of you has been living in a room you never left. If anything, you are the one others come to with their worst news. You are trusted. You are the steady one. There is something almost comic about that and something very sad. The person holding everyone's secrets, holding one of their own so tightly that it has left marks. That kindness, by the way, is not a coincidence. We will come back to it. Because some of what looks like your best quality is actually a payment plan. That is the surface meaning, and it is real. But it is only the first of 3 layers. The second explains why this specific number chose this window of your life. And the third is the one almost nobody explains because it asks you to give something up. Stay with me. Because if you have felt like you were carrying something no one could name, the next few minutes are going to name it. The weight you kept carrying after everyone else moved on. Notice something about the scene you replay. You are always the defendant, and you are also the judge. There is no one else in that room. The other person forgot, or forgave, or died, or simply moved into a life where your mistake is not a chapter anymore. Think about that for a moment, honestly. If you could see their week, their ordinary Wednesday, their concerns, your name would probably not appear anywhere in it. Not because you did not matter, because life kept moving for them and it stopped for you. They have new problems, new people, a version of themselves that formed after you, shaped by 100 things you were not present for. If you met them now, you would have to be introduced to who they became. You are the only one still holding the file open. Think about how strange that actually is. A courtroom that meets nightly with one participant over a case nobody else remembers. You do not schedule it. It schedules you. And the verdict is always the same. That is the detail people miss. A trial with a predetermined outcome is not a trial. It is a ritual. You are not investigating what happened. You already know what happened. You are performing a ceremony of self-condemnation, and you have performed it so many times that the words come automatically. Rituals do not need to be believed to be effective. They only need to be repeated. That is why yours has survived so long without ever producing an insight. It was never designed to produce one. Notice, too, that the prosecution never presents new evidence. Nothing has been added in years. The same 3 or 4 images, the same expression on someone's face, the same silence afterward. A mind-seeking truth would eventually run out of material. A mind-seeking punishment never does. And notice what is never allowed in the room. Context. Your age at the time. What you were surviving that month. What you did not know. What nobody had ever taught you. What you were afraid of. Who else was involved and what they contributed. What you had been told about yourself by then. What had already been done to you. How tired you were. How little sleep you were getting. Whether anyone had ever shown you a better way to handle exactly that situation. All of that is inadmissible in your courtroom. Only the act is allowed in, stripped of everything that surrounded it, isolated, held up under a light. No fair trial has ever worked that way. And you have been calling it honesty. There is also no defense attorney. Not one. In every real proceeding on earth, even the clearly guilty are given someone whose entire job is to say, wait, there is more to this. You have never appointed that person. You considered it disloyal. You have treated your own defense as a kind of corruption. As if understanding yourself would be the first step toward excusing yourself, and excusing yourself would be the first step toward doing it again. And you have told yourself, this is integrity, that a person who truly regrets something should carry it, that putting it down would make you careless or cold, or the kind of person who hurts people and shrugs. This is the part that keeps you locked. Your guilt is not just pain, it has become evidence. Evidence that you are decent, evidence that you understood what you did, evidence that you are not the version of yourself you are afraid of being. So every time you consider releasing it, something in you panics. Because releasing the guilt feels like erasing the proof. Notice the logic underneath that. You have made suffering your character witness. As long as it hurts, you are still good. That is the deal you signed with yourself, probably without noticing. And it is a deal with no expiration date, which means it is not really a deal. A deal has terms. This has only obligations. Here is the flaw in it. If suffering proved goodness, the world would be full of healed people. It is not. It is full of people carrying old sentences and calling it maturity. Pain proves nothing about character. It only proves that something happened. The people you admire most for their decency are almost never the ones drowning in self-reproach. They are usually lighter than that. Their goodness comes from attention, not from penance. Think of the most genuinely good person you know, not the most tormented. The most good. The one who notices when someone goes quiet. The one who tells the truth gently. The one who shows up. Ask yourself whether that person seems to be paying for something. They do not. Their goodness has no debt behind it. It comes from having attention to spare, and attention to spare is exactly what guilt takes first. They are not carrying what you are carrying, and they are still good, which means the carrying was never what made goodness possible. That is why self-forgiveness stalls, where forgiving others does not. When you forgive another person, you give something away. When you try to forgive yourself, you feel like you are getting away with something. Watch how differently you treat others. Someone tells you about their worst decision and you find compassion instantly. You see their context, their age, their fear, their limited information. You extend that understanding without hesitation. You do not even labor over it. It comes out of you naturally, the way water finds a lower place, and then you turn the same lens on yourself and it hardens into a magnifying glass. Ask why the standard changes. It is not because you are worse than them. It is because you were inside your own decision, so you remember every second where you could have chosen differently. You remember the pause before you spoke. You remember the moment you could have turned around. Nobody else has access to those seconds. You do, and so it feels like you chose it fully, deliberately with all the clarity in the world. But that is not what those seconds were. They were not clarity. They were panic, or numbness, or wanting, or fear moving faster than thought. You have re-narrated them as deliberation because you are remembering them from a calm place, and calm cannot imagine its own absence. Nobody gets that footage of anyone else, only of themselves. And having the footage feels like having proof of intent. It is not proof of intent, it is proof of proximity. And there is a second distortion in that footage. You watch it with everything you learned afterward. You watch it knowing the outcome. The person in the recording did not know the outcome. You are judging someone for failing a test whose answers you only received later. Worse, you received those answers because they failed. The understanding you now use as the standard did not exist until the mistake produced it. You are punishing the only person who could have taught you. There is another layer to this that most people never name. Part of you does not want to be forgiven. Read that again slowly, because there is usually a flinch. That flinch is information, because forgiveness would mean the story is over. And if the story is over, you have to live in the present, where nothing is being paid, where you are simply a person with a future. That is more frightening than the guilt. The guilt is familiar. The guilt has a shape. You know exactly where it lives and exactly how it feels at 3 a.m. Freedom does not have a shape yet. Nobody has ever described to you what you would do with the hours. Nobody has told you who you are when there is nothing to answer for. And identity abhors a vacuum. If you have organized years of your inner life around being the person who did that thing, then removing it does not feel like relief. It feels like disappearance. Consider how much of your self-understanding runs through that one event. Why you are careful. Why you do not ask for much. Why you distrust your own instincts. Why you are surprised when someone stays. Pull out that one thread and a great deal of the fabric moves. No wonder you have left it in place. That is why people cling to their worst chapter. Not because they enjoy it, because it is load-bearing. And here is where most people misread the sign entirely. They assume the repetition is a verdict, a cosmic reminder, a tap on the shoulder that says, "Do not forget what you did." It is the opposite. Patterns like this do not respond to the event. They respond to the frequency of the loop, to repetition itself. You are running the same emotional circuit at the same hour, night after night, month after month. That is a fixed signal. And fixed signals get answered. Think about when the number first appeared, not when the mistake happened. When did the number start? Take a moment with that question because most people have never separated the two. The event has one date, the number has another, and the gap between them is usually years. Almost always it begins in the period when the guilt stopped being fresh and started being permanent, when it stopped hurting sharply and began humming quietly underneath everything. Your work, your relationships, your ability to accept good things. That is the moment the signal becomes readable. Fresh pain is loud but temporary. It burns and then it changes shape. Permanent guilt is quiet and structural. It stops being an event and becomes a room you live in. Signs do not arrive for the fire. They arrive for the architecture. And architecture is what you stop noticing. Nobody comments on the walls of the house they live in. That is exactly the problem. A guilt that has become structural no longer feels like guilt. It feels like realism. It feels like simply knowing who you are. That is the disguise. When a belief becomes old enough, it stops sounding like a belief and starts sounding like a fact. You do not say, "I am judging myself harshly." You say, "I am just being honest about myself." Those two sentences feel identical from the inside, and they are not remotely the same. One of them can be examined. The other cannot, because you have filed it under reality rather than opinion, and nobody audits reality. Because unresolved guilt does something strange to time. It freezes one version of you in place, the person who did that thing, and every year that passes, you keep that person alive, on trial, in a room with no exit. Everything else about you moved forward. Your face changed. Your work changed. Your opinions changed. The people around you changed. And one version of you stayed exactly where they were, in 1 week of 1 year, still holding the same information they held then. Watch how that distortion shows up in ordinary life. You hesitate before accepting something good. You apologize for taking up space. You assume the worst interpretation of your own motives before anyone else has the chance to. You overgive in relationships, then feel invisible. Then blame yourself for feeling invisible. You struggle to receive a compliment without immediately correcting it. You find yourself preemptively confessing your flaws to new people, as if disclosure were a kind of insurance. You say yes when you mean no, and then resent yourself for the yes rather than for the pattern. You brace when things go well, waiting for the correction you are certain is coming. You keep a small distance from people who love you, so that if they ever leave, it will feel like something you predicted, rather than something you lost. You apologize twice for the same thing because the first one never quite counted. You over-explain yourself in situations where nobody asked, as if you were always mid-defense of something. You read tone into messages that had none, because some part of you is always scanning for the moment you are finally found out. You measure your worth and usefulness, and go quiet the moment you have nothing to offer. None of that comes from the mistake. All of it comes from the sentence. This is what I meant about the kindness. Some of your generosity is real, and some of it is restitution being paid to people who never held the debt. That kind of giving is exhausting, because it can never be enough. It is not aimed at the person in front of you. It is aimed at a ledger, and people can feel the difference even if they cannot name it. Generosity that comes from abundance feels warm. Generosity that comes from debt feels heavy, and it quietly asks for something in return that nobody can provide. You have grown. You would not do it again. You already learned everything that experience had to teach you, and you learned it years ago. But the sentence continues, long after the lesson ended. Consider what that means practically. Every ounce of energy spent guarding that old case is energy unavailable for the life in front of you. Guilt is not free. It has a price, and you have been paying it in attention, and attention is the only real currency you have. It is what you give to people. It is what makes presence possible. Half of yours has been stationed at a door that leads nowhere. Think about the conversations you were half inside of, the evenings you were physically present for and mentally elsewhere, the moment someone was telling you something that mattered while a part of you was in that old room, arguing a case that had already been decided. That is what it actually cost. Not abstract well-being. Specific hours with specific people. Some of those people are still available. Some of them are not. That is the true weight of this. And it has nothing to do with the original act. That is the tension the repetition is pointing at. Not your character. Your calendar. Something in your life is waiting for a closure you keep refusing to sign. And the number that keeps appearing is not a random one. It is a number with a very specific meaning, and it is the one number in this tradition that people are taught to fear. That fear is exactly why its message has been misread for centuries, why 444 keeps finding you. The number is 444. That is what has been following you. In digits, on screens, on receipts, on the clock, at the exact moment your mind went back to that scene. And your first reaction to reading that is probably resistance, which is precisely the point. 444 is the number of foundation. 4 walls, 4 corners, the shape of something built to hold weight. It does not appear to announce a mistake. It appears where a structure is being repaired from underneath, in the part of a life nobody can see from the outside. Notice how rarely anyone questions what that shape actually means. Most people read the number as reassurance and move on, without asking why reassurance would need to repeat itself 3 times. It comes from construction. 4 is the number of what holds. 4 walls in a room, 4 legs under a table, 4 corners of a foundation. 4 is not inspiration or speed. 4 is the number of the thing that has to bear weight without moving. 4 is the number of things that can be built on. It is what stays standing after everything decorative has been stripped away. 444 is what happens when that foundation has to be laid again. It is the number that appears during repair, not during collapse. That is why it feels steady and uncomfortable at the same time. Not because something is being destroyed, because something is being taken apart in order to be set correctly. Notice how consistent that meaning stays wherever the number is studied. Foundations are always poured underground. Nobody watches the work. There is no visible progress for a long stretch, and from the surface the site looks abandoned rather than active. That is exactly what repair feels like from inside a person. Nothing appears to be improving. The scene still replays at night. And underneath, the load is quietly being transferred onto something sturdier than shame. 444 shows up after the damage, not before it. It is not a warning. It is the sound of work already in progress. And there is a reason that feels uncomfortable instead of comforting. A foundation cannot be repaired while you are still standing on the old one. Something has to be lifted off it first. Something has to be set down. Which means the number was never a verdict. It was an instruction. And instructions about setting things down are the ones most of us avoid most carefully. Read that again in the context of your guilt. You are keeping a version of yourself alive that has already ended. The person who made that choice does not exist anymore. Their circumstances are gone. Their understanding is gone. Their fear is gone. Their body is not even the same. Their beliefs are not the same. If they walked into a room with you now, you would disagree with them about almost everything. You would find them naive. You would find them frightened in ways you are no longer frightened. You might even find them a little unrecognizable, and that recognition failure is the whole point. That version completed its cycle, and you have been performing resuscitation on it every night. 444 appears at exactly that intersection, where a cycle has genuinely ended but has not been released. This is the detail that changes everything. 444 is not the number of punishment. It is the number of the unburied. It appears when something in your life is dead but unmourned. A relationship you technically left but never grieved. A self-image you outgrew but still defend. A mistake you learned from but never laid down. A version of you that served its purpose, took its damage, and was never thanked or released. Grief and guilt look similar from the outside. Both involve returning to the past, but grief moves toward release, and guilt moves toward repetition. Guilt is grief with the exit blocked. Sit with that comparison for a moment because it explains the exhaustion. Grief tires you, and then slowly restores you. Guilt only tires you. It takes the same energy and produces no movement. Grief has a direction. It hurts more at the beginning and less further along, and even when it returns differently. Guilt returns identically, year after year, at the same volume, wearing the same clothes. You have been grieving in a circle instead of a line, and there is a reason nobody taught you the difference. We have rituals for grief, funerals, anniversaries, people bringing food, permission to be quiet for a while. Someone stands up and says words, someone else holds your arm. There is a moment where everyone agrees publicly that something has ended and you are allowed to be changed by it. We have no ritual for the death of a former self, no ceremony for the day you became someone who would not do that again. Nobody sends flowers when you outgrow the person who hurt somebody. Nobody marks that date. It is one of the most significant transitions a human being can make, and it happens with no witnesses at all. So the ending happened, and nobody marked it, and you kept the body. That is the whole problem in one sentence. Not that you did something wrong. That nobody ever told you the chapter was allowed to close. And what blocks the exit is a belief you probably never said out loud. That mourning who you were would be disrespectful to whoever you hurt. That letting yourself off would somehow retroactively minimize what they went through. That your ongoing pain is the last remaining acknowledgement of theirs. So you stay. Loyal to the pain, as if pain were a form of payment. Ask yourself something honest. Has anyone ever benefited from your continued suffering? Has the person you hurt been healed by a single one of your sleepless nights? They have not. Not once. Suffering does not transfer. It only accumulates in the one who holds it. If it worked that way, you would have repaired everything years ago. You have paid enough to buy back 100 mistakes, and nothing moved. If pain were currency, you would be the wealthiest person you know, and someone somewhere would have felt richer for it. Nobody did. That is because guilt is not a currency anyone can spend. It is a fire that only consumes the room it burns in. Now consider the timing of the appearances. Notice where you were when you saw 4 recently. For most people it lands during ordinary moments, not during dramatic breakdowns. During a normal Tuesday when the mind drifts, when the loop reopens quietly. You are in line somewhere, or driving, or waiting for a screen to load, or standing in a kitchen with nothing particular happening. The mind goes where it always goes, and the number is there. That timing is the message. The pattern surfaces when the loop is running, not when the wound is fresh. It is marking the machinery, not the memory. There is something almost tender about that once you see it clearly. The sign is not interested in your worst night. It is interested in your habit. It appears in the mundane, because that is where the real damage happens. Not in the dramatic collapse, but in the 1,000 small refusals to let yourself rest. A dramatic collapse announces itself. Someone notices. Someone helps. A quiet habit does not. It costs you decades and nobody ever sees the bill. That is why this has gone unaddressed for so long. Nothing about it ever looked urgent. It never interrupted your work. It never made a scene. It just quietly took a percentage of every year. And percentages compound. That is the part worth sitting with. A small tax on your presence, charged daily for a decade, is not a small thing. It is a different life. And once you see that, a harder question appears. If the cycle is genuinely complete, and the lesson is genuinely learned, then what exactly are you still paying for? Because there is an answer to that, and it is not comfortable. The debt that was already paid. Guilt operates like a debt, and debts have a strange property. They can be paid in full and still be collected if nobody tells the collector to stop. You paid. You paid with sleepless nights, with apologies, spoken or written or never sent, with years of overcorrecting, of being smaller, of accepting less than you deserved because part of you believed you had already used up your allowance of good things. You paid with the anniversaries you spent flinching. You paid in relationships you left early because you were certain they would eventually see what you saw in yourself. You paid in opportunities you did not reach for because a part of you had already decided you had not earned them. You paid in rooms you stayed quiet in when you had something worth saying because a person like you should not take up that much space. You paid in the love you accepted at a discount because full price felt like something reserved for people without your history. You paid in friendships you kept at arm's length so nobody would ever get close enough to ask the wrong question. You paid in years of being the strong one because being the one who needed something felt unavailable to you. You paid in the version of your life that never got built because the architect was busy defending an old case. The account closed a long time ago. You just never stopped making payments. Here is the distinction that ends this loop. Remorse and self-punishment are not the same instrument. Remorse changes behavior. It makes you careful, honest, aware of your impact. It is finite, because once behavior changes, remorse has done its work. Self-punishment changes nothing. It performs suffering as a substitute for repair. And it is infinite by design, because it has no completion condition. There is no amount of pain that satisfies it. Ask yourself honestly which one you have been running. There is a simple test. Remorse makes you turn toward people. Punishment makes you hide from them. Remorse says I want to do better with the ones still here. Punishment says I do not deserve to be here at all. One builds. One erases. There is a second test. Remorse is specific. It names the act. Punishment is total. It names the person. If your inner voice still says the same sentence it said 5 years ago, word for word, with the same weight, that is not remorse working. That is a recording playing. And there is a third test, the hardest one. Remorse ends. Punishment recruits. It goes looking for new evidence, and it finds it in things that have nothing to do with the original act. You forget to reply to a message, and the old feeling arrives. You disappoint someone in a small, ordinary way, and the whole file opens again. That is the tell. The guilt is no longer about the event. The event has become a lens you look at your entire life through. If your old guilt has started attaching itself to unrelated failures, small ones, recent ones, then it has stopped being about what happened. It has become a way of seeing. If your guilt has made you kinder, more careful, more awake, remorse already finished its job. What remains is a habit wearing the costume of a virtue. And 444 appears to interrupt exactly that habit. Understand what it is asking. It is not asking you to say what happened was fine. It is not asking you to forget, or to excuse, or to pretend you were not responsible. Nothing here suggests that what you did not matter. It mattered. Somebody was affected. That is real, and it stays real. Releasing the sentence does not revise the history. Both things are allowed to be true at once, and the belief that they cannot be is what has kept you standing in that room. It is asking you to stop confusing punishment with accountability. Real accountability lives in the present. It shows up in how you treat people now, in what you refuse to repeat, in the honesty you bring to the next difficult moment. Punishment lives in the past, and it keeps you there, useless to everyone, including the person you hurt. That is the quiet cruelty of unforgiven guilt. It looks like moral seriousness. It functions as paralysis. And here is the part almost nobody says out loud. Your self-punishment may be protecting you from something harder. Because carrying guilt privately feels safer than changing publicly. Suffering requires no risk. Living differently does. As long as you are paying, you never have to prove anything. The suffering becomes the whole contribution. It is easier to hate yourself in private than to become someone in public. Self-hatred asks nothing of you but time. Growth asks you to be seen, imperfect, in motion, capable of failing again, and that is the real fear underneath all of it. Not that you were bad, that you could be again, that if you step out of the penance and back into life, you will be exposed to the possibility of causing harm a second time. Guilt, in that light, is a kind of house arrest you assigned yourself for public safety. It feels responsible. It is actually a way of never being tested again. That is the real reason the loop persists. Not because you deserve it, because it is safe. And it is worth saying plainly. Nobody ever built a good life on the foundation of self-contempt. It does not produce carefulness. It produces avoidance. It produces people who never risk anything and call it humility. So here is what closing this actually requires. Not a ceremony, not a perfect feeling of peace, a decision. You separate the act from the identity. You say the sentence that has been waiting. I did that, and I am no longer that. Both halves must be spoken. Skip the first and it becomes denial. Skip the second and it becomes a life sentence. Say it slowly, the way you would say something true. And notice the resistance when you do. Something in you will want to add a qualifier. Yes, but something that keeps the door open. Let the qualifier pass. It is only the habit asking to stay. You do not need to feel forgiven for this to work. Feelings arrive late. They follow decisions rather than precede them. The decision is the part you actually control, and it is the part that has been waiting. You may have to make it more than once. That is not failure. A decision this old will need to be renewed a few times before the body believes it. Then you let the older version of you finish dying. You stop defending them. You stop putting them on trial. You let them belong to a cycle that is closed. and you do something you have probably never done. You thank them, because that version of you survived something with the limited understanding they had. They did not know what you know now. They were not equipped for what happened. They made a choice with the tools available at the time. That is not a defense. It is simply what is true. Think of them the way you would think of a younger person who came to you frightened and confused and made the wrong call. You would not sentence them for life. You would sit with them. You would ask what was happening for them that week. You would notice how alone they were. You would probably be surprised at how much they were carrying and how little help they had. You would want to know who was supposed to be protecting them and why nobody was. That person is still waiting for someone to sit with them. It was always going to be you. Nobody else can do this part. Not the person you hurt, even if they forgave you. Not a friend who says you were too hard on yourself. You have heard both, and neither landed, because the sentence was never theirs to lift. You were the one who issued it. You are the only one with the authority to close it. That is what 444 has been standing next to all this time. The threshold you kept refusing to cross. It appears where a phase has ended, waiting for someone to acknowledge the ending. And this is why the number arrived now, and not during the worst of it. It arrives when you are finally strong enough to release something. Signs like this do not visit the wound. They visit the readiness. You would not be noticing 444 if part of you were not already preparing to put this down. Think about that carefully. You did not seek this out during the collapse. You are here now in a calmer season, with enough distance to look at the pattern directly. That distance is the readiness. The fact that you have stayed with these words instead of turning away is itself the evidence. Something in you already knew what this was about before it was named. So notice what changes after tonight. The number may keep appearing for a while, then it will begin to fade, and that fading is not abandonment. It is confirmation that the loop it was marking has finally gone quiet. Some people describe it as a strange lightness in the days that follow, not euphoria, something closer to a room going silent after a long noise you had stopped hearing. You may notice you sleep differently, that the scene comes back once and then loses its grip. You may find yourself accepting something good without the reflex of flinching first. You may catch yourself saying no to something, cleanly without an apology attached. You may notice that you can think about that period of your life without your whole body changing temperature. You may find that you have more attention available than you remembered having, and that people around you respond to it before you have said anything at all. You may notice that you laughed at something without checking first whether you were allowed to. That is what completion feels like. Undramatic, almost ordinary. And if the loop returns, and it may, you will know what it is. Not a verdict. A habit looking for its old room. You will not have to argue with it. You will simply decline to attend. That is the whole practice. Not winning the argument. Not attending the trial. You were never being reminded of what you did. You were being asked to come back from it. The person you were is gone. The person you are is standing here, still capable of tenderness, still able to love people well, still holding a future that has nothing to do with that room. There are people in your life right now who need the version of you that is not spending half its attention on a closed case. Someone who wants your full presence at dinner. Someone who needs you awake, not haunted. Someone who has been waiting for you to arrive somewhere you have technically been for years. Give them that version. That is the only repair that was ever available. The debt is settled. It was settled a long time ago. You were simply the last one to be told. Let them rest and walk out.